Today I'm going to show you how to set up the flash on your a7 III for the first time. So you've just bought a flash for your Sony a7 III, you put it on the camera and you don't get the results that you want. I'm going to go through the steps of how to set it up properly and how to get it working well with your camera. Now today I have this flash, which is the Sony HVL F60RM, and I'll show you how to use this successfully for the first time. But if you have one of the Godox flashes, or pretty much any flash that has this line of connectors, so it's made for the Sony camera, I'll show you how to use that properly. And to be honest, I'll show you how to use pretty much any flash on this camera in manual mode. You do need to check the polarity of the flash. You don't want to use the really old flashes. So if you do have a really old flash, check the compatibility with your a7 III, but it will take a lot of different flashes and a lot of different flash units. Most of them will be in manual mode, but the ones with these tags along the top, they'll be able to give you all of the modes that the flash offers. First of all, let's clear something up. I've done a few tutorials and setups with my normal flash units, and a few people have shown their concerns about the fragility of the components in the Sony hot shoe. So that's the fragility of these metal bits here and also in the top of the hot shoe. Now you really don't have to worry about these connections. They're pretty solid and they're quite durable. I have some Yongnuo flashes made for Canon. I've got monitors, metal cold shoe mounts, wireless triggers, mirror mounts that I've kind of shoved in these hot shoes. And over the past 8 years, I've been doing this continuously. And I've never had one of those connections break or even slightly malfunction. So please don't worry too much about these connectors. Now, if you had a knife or something and you were digging around in there, that might cause problems. But I've never had an issue whatsoever with them over the last 8 years. Now, the only thing I've heard was from using really old flashes with reversed polarities, which I've already mentioned, which could throw a lot of current back into your camera. So if you do have a really old flash, either use it with a remote trigger or kind of check the compatibility with that flash and the a7 III. Now, if you don't have a dedicated Sony flash, but you have something like this Yongnuo flash unit designed for Canon cameras, this can still work, but you just have to go into the menus and turn live view display to off. If you're not sure how to do this, click on the eye in the corner or the link in the description to another of my tutorials. Now here's a hint, go into your menus, go to tab 2 and page 6 of 9, and it's at the bottom. The only downside to using a flash that's not made for your Sony camera is that you'll lose functions like TTL and multi-mode. So it's best if you can, and if you can afford it, to buy one that's actually made for your Sony a7 III. Like I've already said, companies like Godox do make dedicated Sony flashes. So if you don't want to spend all of that money on a branded Sony flash, you can buy something like the Godox flashes. So I've got my camera set up on the tripod and I've tethered my laptop and I'm recording the back screen so you can see what's going on the back screen when I attach my flash and I get everything working. So you can see exactly the steps that I'm going to go through. First thing you want to do is take off this hot shoe cover. So get rid of that and then get your flash. Now with the Sonys, it doesn't matter whether they're on or off. When you connect the flash to your camera, when everything's on, it'll just detect that flash. But if you're a little bit wary about doing this, just turn everything off and then connect it up. So I've got my flash on and I've got my camera on. So I'm going to connect that up. So if you look at the back of the screen, as I connect it up, the settings change around quite a bit and it puts that flash logo up. So what you'll find is I'm in aperture priority mode, and I've got the flash in TTL, but it's pushed the shutter speed to 1/60th of a second. Also, the exposure meter reading on the back of the camera is flashing. And normally when something's flashing on the back of your camera, it is trying to tell you something and it's trying to draw your attention to that thing. So what it's saying is it can't reach the exposure compensation at 0 in aperture priority mode with these settings. Now this is due to the flash being in fill mode. So if I go into my menus and I'm going to tab 1, page 11 of 14, which is my flash menu, the flash mode is in fill flash. So if I was to switch this to slow sync, what this would do, now you can see it's dropped my shutter speed down to 0.6 of a second. So there are certain settings you need to change if you're going to shoot in aperture priority mode and TTL. Now with these flash modes, there's 5 different settings. A few of them are grayed out. So obviously I've got my flash connected, so flash off isn't an option. And the auto flash, that's not an option either. Let's see what it says. So in aperture priority, it's not going to allow me to do that. So I think if I was in auto mode, it would allow me to do that. So let's try it. So if I switch to auto, I've got my flash connected. Flash mode. There, I can go to auto mode. And that is fully automatic. Now, to learn as much as you can about flash photography in the shortest amount of time, auto mode is not the way to go, because the camera is deciding what settings it has, the flash is deciding how much power it's throwing out. So you don't have any control whatsoever. So I'm just going through the steps and showing what will happen if you have it in different settings, so you can kind of understand what these settings are. So we have flash auto, which I've just shown you only works in auto mode. And then we have fill flash. And that's kind of the normal mode that you'll shoot in, say if you're using shutter speeds between 1/60th and 1/200th of a second. Then you've got slow sync, which means you can drop your shutter speed down a lot more. And then you've got rear sync. What that does is, as the shutter opens, it flashes just before the shutter closes again. So it's kind of synced with the rear curtain. So you have lots of different settings in your a7 III to photograph lots of different things. So for now, I'm going to go back into aperture priority, and I've got the flash on TTL. I need that exposure to come up a bit, so I'm going to change my fill flash to slow sync. And this will give me good settings for the ambient light, so for my constant light, that'll give me good settings for those, but it'll also fire in a bit of flash. So let's see what happens when we take a shot with a flash directly facing at the subject. I'll get focus and take the shot. I'm just going to take a shot without the flash so we can see the difference. So that is the shot without the flash, and this is the shot with the flash. It's a subtle difference, but when you have the flash on, it almost makes the subject pop a little bit more. Now the problem with this is, say if I take the camera off the tripod, so I'm shooting handheld and I'll take a photo. So as you can see, that shot is really blurry. It's because that shutter speed is low, so the movement of my hand is putting blur into the shot. Even though the flash is chucking light in the shot, when I move my hands, that movement is still transferring across to that shot. So I need to make changes so I can shoot handheld or shoot from a tripod. Now, if you are adamant about shooting in TTL, you need to up the power of the flash if you're shooting in this mode and you want to be shooting handheld. The way to get around this is flash compensation. So I'll go into my menus again, which is tab 1, page 11 of 14, and I'll go to flash comp. That's flash compensation. Now what you need to do with this is push it up. So this will increase or decrease the amount of power that you're putting into your flash, or the amount of power that you're telling the camera to change it to. So you're basically saying, the camera's not getting it right and the flash isn't getting it right, so I want more flash power in my shot. And that's what flash compensation does really. It's a lot like exposure compensation for the camera, but it's just working with the flash power. So flash compensation, if I go into this and I knock it up by 1 stop, when I take a shot now, that's brighter. Now, if I knock it up by 1 stop again, this will be even brighter again. So if you look at those shots, this is flash compensation plus 2 stops. This one's only got 1 stop more of flash power. And then this one is the normal exposure that it thinks works well with these settings. And this is why I always tell people to put the camera and the flash in manual mode. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'll go to my flash and I'll go to manual mode. Then I'll go to my camera and I'll put that in manual mode as well. Now I have some base settings that I always set my camera to and I always set my flash to. What this is 1/4 power on the flash, 1/200th of a second as a shutter speed, f8 and ISO 100. Now with these settings, if I didn't have the flash connected, my screen would be pitch black, and I'll show you this now. So if I turn my flash off, with my screen on the back of the camera, it's gone completely pitch black. Because with those settings, there's not enough light about in here to get a good shot. So I'll get focus and I'll take a shot. And as you can see, that shot is pitch black. Now, if you were to connect a flash that wasn't made for a Sony camera, let's say a Yongnuo that's been made for a Canon camera, you can still use that in manual mode, but you won't get to see what's going on because of those settings. What you need to do is go into your camera and turn off live view display. The great thing with the Sony flashes, or the flashes like the Godox flashes that are made for this camera, so the ones with all of those little tags on the bottom that are made for the multi-Sony hot shoe or whatever it's called, what will happen is, through all of those little connectors, it will tell the camera that a flash has been connected, and then it will automatically turn off live view display, exactly like it's done now. Again, that meter is flashing, so it's telling me with those settings alone, I'm going to get a really underexposed shot. But we're putting flash power in, it's on manual, and it's 1/4 power, so it's going to chuck in quite a lot of light. So if I take a shot now, as you can see, it's still a horrible direct flash. It's a little bit overexposed, but we can change that quite quickly. The main reason why it doesn't look very good is because of that direct flash. So it's this small light source going straight onto the subject and getting a shadow underneath it, and there's a lot of power there as well. The quickest way to get around this is to tilt your flash up to the ceiling. What this will do is produce a huge light source on the ceiling, and then all of that soft top light will come down back onto your subject. Now, even though I'm photographing my small folding camera, you can do this at events or parties or anything like that. Just point the flash up to the ceiling and you get nice soft light, and you'll get really nice complementary light on people because that light source is so big. So if I take another shot now, it's a little bit underexposed. However, what I'm going to do is let more light into the camera. What I'm going to do is open up my aperture to let more of that light in. If you remember from my basics in flash photography, when you change your shutter speed, it will let more ambient light in or less ambient light in. When you change your aperture, if there isn't much ambient light about at all, it will let more or less flash light in. And obviously when you change the power of the flash, that will increase or decrease the power of that flash. If you're not sure what I'm talking about and I've just completely lost you, click on the eye in the corner or the link in the description and go and watch my basics in flash photography tutorial. There you'll learn all about that and all about those settings. So what I'm going to do is change my aperture down to f4 and take another shot. So that's 2 stops of light extra coming into the camera. So now when I take that shot, this looks much better. There's no harsh shadows. There's no bright, horrible, overexposed light on my subject, and it's really nice, soft top light. So where is it? That is that direct, horrible, harsh light. And then this is the correctly exposed shot with that top light, so with the bounce light off the ceiling. This is all you need to do really, is start experimenting in bouncing the light off different surfaces. When you're in manual mode, you have control over everything. You're not letting the camera control anything at all. I've got control over my shutter speed, my aperture, my ISO, and also my flash power. And then you just need to troubleshoot really. So if the shot looks like there's too much flash power in it, you reduce your flash power or close down that aperture. If there's not enough ambient light and you want to introduce more of that ambient light, slow down your shutter speed, letting in more of that ambient light. And just play around with the settings. The other one is, if you want more ambient light and flashlight, just change your ISO. And again, You've also got your flash power to change. So if you want more flash power coming in and you don't want to change your aperture, you increase or decrease your flash power. So by changing those 4 settings, you have all of the control over what shot you get. Now you need to get as much experience with the flash as possible, so it's great in setting something like this up so you can play around with those settings and see what different looks you can get. Now if you're photographing people and it looks like they've got dark shadows in their eye sockets, one thing is to aim the flash up and back. Because if you're aiming it forward, that flash can be over their head and really lighting them from the top. So if I tilt it forward now with these settings, if I take a photo of this, you can see the light is a little bit further over the top of the folding camera that I'm photographing. Whereas if I tip it back and take another photograph, that light has come forward a little bit, so it's lighting the front of that folding camera a little bit more. So if we look at them side by side, that's lighting the front a little bit, that's lighting the back. And that was literally by having the flash a little bit forward and a little bit backwards. So if you're photographing people and they've got dark eye sockets, tip that flash back. Now this Sony one is a bit strange in how it works. It tilts right back or right forward, then this whole thing goes to one side or the other. But you may have like a Yongnuo, or you may have a more traditional flash like this, which rotates. So you may have to tip it back like that, or forward like that. So depending on what flash you have, you've got to manipulate that flashlight. Now, if you have a flash that doesn't have a tilt head, I'd probably suggest sending it back because I don't really see the point in them. If the flash is pointing forward the whole time, it doesn't really do much for your photography and you'll only get those harsh, horrible looking, like amateurish flashed shots. Sometimes that can work, but it's not that often. So you want one of these that has a tilt head and a head that will also rotate. So you can change that flash and you can change the look of your shot just by tilting the head or rotating the head. Now there is one other look that I'm going to go for, and that's by bouncing it off this wall here. So I'm going to tilt this flash now to the side. I'm going to take another shot. My settings are still 1/4 power on the flash, 1/200th, f4 and ISO 100. So I'll focus on the folding camera and then take a shot. I'll move it up just a touch. Now with this shot, instead of it being lit directly from the top, it's lit from the side. This almost gives the impression that there might be a window there or you've got the person stood next to a window light. So in aiming it and bouncing it off different surfaces, you can increase the size of that flash, giving a nicer, softer light that will wrap around your subject. But also what this will do is almost give the impression of a window or of a top light or of anything like that really, a light source that's directional. And that's what we're going for here, is directional light without taking the flash off the camera. So you don't need any triggers, you don't need anything like that. All you need is a flash with a tiltable, rotatable head. So the next one I'm going to try is bouncing it off the opposite wall. Now this is a bit further away, so that light will be a little bit darker, but it will still probably produce some nice light. It's a little bit underexposed, so I'm going to increase the power to 1/2 power on the flash. Now because that wall is a lot further away, it's produced a much bigger light source and it's nice and soft again, so it's lighting the subject really well. So what you want to do is just go out, get the flash on your camera and just experiment with it. Take as many shots as possible, play around with the tilt head, play around with those settings, because the more experience you get with your flash, the more you'll start to understand it. So basically, you want everything in manual, so you have complete control over everything. Have your flash in manual at 1/4 power, have your camera at 1/200th of a second, f8 ISO 100. Then from there, that's kind of like your starting point, and then you'll tweak and tune the settings to suit. If you want more or less ambient light, you need to change your shutter speed. If you want more or less flash power, obviously change the power of the flash on the back of the flash. Then you can also manipulate the flash and the ambient light by changing your aperture and your ISO. And that's basically it. That's all you need to do. But remember, if the flash is directly pointing at your subject, with these small flash heads, that is a really small light source, so it'll produce really harsh light. So think about bouncing it off a ceiling or bouncing it off a wall, or if you don't have that, maybe get a diffuser on the top of your camera. But by thinking about your settings like this and remembering to produce as big a light source as possible to produce nice soft light, and then thinking about directional light, like bouncing it off this wall or bouncing off the other wall or even off the ceiling, forwards or backwards, you can really get the direction of light that you want, even with the flash on top of your camera. Now, the next thing to do is get your flash off that camera. But to do this, you will need a flash with wireless triggers, or you'll need to buy your own wireless trigger system to connect up with your flash head. Now, to learn about wireless triggers, click on this next video here. And to learn about off-camera flash photography, click on this one down here. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for weekly tutorials in photography. I'll see you next time.